Amateur Traveler is in its 20th year now, but can you imagine if I had people on the show who had never been to the destination, but had just read about it or seen a movie about it? That wouldn't make any sense at all, and you wouldn't listen. We all know how important it is to receive advice from people who know a destination to get the most authentic local experience. And a great option for experiencing this is Explore Worldwide and their authentic small group adventures, led by local tour leaders, perfect for solo travelers who want to meet like minded people with a desire for adventure. I'm often an independent traveler, but two of my last three trips were with small group tours because they organize everything and it's a lot easier. If you want to recreate the tour I did to Malta, they have a Malta and Gozo Discovery Tour. I'm intrigued by one of their tours called A Taste of Sicily. The company again is Explore Worldwide, and visit exploreworldwide.com to learn more. And thanks to Explore Worldwide for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
I got my bags packed, I'm on a roll. I'm heading out there and I'm ready to go. I'm looking real good in my passport photo.
Amateur Traveler, episode 627. Today, the Amateur Traveler talks about colonial towns, churches, Baroque art, mines, ports, and national parks as we go to the colonial heart of Brazil in Minas Gerais. Welcome to the Amateur Traveler. I'm your host, Chris Christensen. Let's talk about Brazil. I'd like to welcome to the show Juergen Keller, who is the co-founder of southamerica.travel and has come to talk to us about the colonial heart of Brazil. Juergen, welcome to the show.
Nice talking to you, Chris. Great to be on your show.
Now, you pitched me the colonial heartland of Brazil. You're going to have to put that on a map for me because there's no map that I can search for that's going to tell me that. So where are we talking about?
Well, of course, the colonial origin of Brazil starts along the coast of Brazil, where the Portuguese landed, but soon after they had populated the shores of Brazil, they got the order from Europe to go inland and search for the gold. This was all done in the very beginning, starting in Rio de Janeiro. So the colonial heartland of Brazil actually is the hinterland of Rio. And if you look at the map of today, it's the part between Rio de Janeiro and the capital of Brazil, Brasilia today. Those mountains were thought to be the source of the silver and the gold that Brazil held at the time. From there, in the beginning, starting from the little port of Paraty, a little bit to the east, southeast of Rio, the Portuguese were told, go up the mountain and find me the gold. And that's where it started, that Portuguese went into the hinterland and started to populate, more or less, or try to populate this area where they thought they could find gold.
Okay. And if we're not looking for gold, why are we heading to this area?
You are heading for this because this is where all the riches are left that the Portuguese did not take away. Just imagine for all these people that lived there and were digging for gold, they also made money. And with the money they made, they built churches and left colonial towns rich of art, mostly Baroque art. And if you wander those streets in Minas Gerais, it looks in part as if you were walking through a town in Portugal. Just with the difference that as soon as you get in a church in Ouro Preto, for example, you are surprised by the gold that there is. And it is said that in the 1700s, streets in Ouro Preto were covered in silver for church festivities.
Excellent. Well, what itinerary do you recommend for us?
Basically, what we do, we follow the gold, and we start with really nice colonial towns that are relaxing. Just imagine you arrive in Rio from a long flight. Then we took you over to Paraty. Paraty is the old colonial town port that remained itself until 1970 when the road from Rio reached Paraty. It is a coast with many mountains, very steep cliffs that made it impossible for anybody to build a road in economical terms from Rio to Paraty. And that's why the city remained what it is nowadays, a gem. And it's actually on the list of becoming a UNESCO heritage site. Parachi itself is good for some relaxing on a schooner and just wandering the streets and look for the galleries and the art that they are selling there in Parachi. That's where we start usually.
And is Parachi down the coast from Rio? And I say down.
Yeah.
The coast really goes pretty much east and west there. So
Exactly. It is mostly east, but slightly south.
Mostly east and slightly south. Okay.
From there, we go up the mountains. The Serra da Bocaina National Park is just behind Parachi, and that is up to 6,000 feet high. But in a way that from the sea, it appears like a wall. You really go up very, very steep. And only 4 years ago, that street has been paved. Before, the street was always out and nobody could use it unless you were a Brazilian city bus, especially built for this road. From there, we go through the forest and the mountains to Caxambu. Caxambu is a spa town where the Emperor of Brazil once came for his spa treatments and to relax in mineral waters. From there on, we go straight to Tiradentes, which is of no political importance whatsoever, but it is just a very beautiful town. And like Parachi, it has maintained its charm because it never was disturbed by outside influences, and roads weren't built there. There was only a narrow gauge railway that came through this town, and there was nothing important. So that's why nobody messed with the architecture of this little town. Nowadays, Tiradentes, not too far away from Belo Horizonte and from other big cities, is a city where people from São Paulo come just to relax over a weekend. And again, it has become an artistic hub for modern artists, not for the old artists. There have been old Baroque artists as well, but they are not that important. It's more for nowadays.
Okay. Well, let's go back and do this in a little more detail. To Parachi, then, what are we doing on the coast when we're there? What are we seeing?
You see in Parachi from the sea on a schooner. You go out on the water. You can dive. But it's more impressive just to look back at the city of Parachi along the shores and behind this huge wall of green mountains covered with clouds and fog. And this is tropical vegetation. And now imagine you, little Portuguese sailor, arrive there and you are told, walk up these mountains and find that gold. This is the most impressive moment. The city itself of Parachi is only, the historic part is only 16 blocks. 4 across and 4 across. That's it. But it's just the impression that you are here and you can feel how the city was lost and cut off civilization until 50 years ago. And that makes it so impressive.
Now, does it predate Rio? But Rio had a better harbor, and so they moved on from here, or how does that work?
They understood back then from Rio that it was easier to get over the mountains from Parachi. They had no clue.
Okay.
I mean, the Portuguese had to follow trails left by the Indians.
Sure.
And from Rio, they couldn't see anything because it's first a flat area along the sea, and only behind Rio then the mountains start. Whereas from Parachi, they could really see the paths left by the Indians going down to the sea, and there they could follow inland. That's the only difference. And soon after the trade of silver and gold really started, then everything was relocated to Rio, because then they understood also the way how to get from the main hub of gold mining to Rio.
Well, and my impression is when they got here, when you say they're following the native people over on their trails, we're not talking about in the Peru area, for instance, where you have the mighty Incan civilization, or in Mexico with the Aztecs and the Mayans and such. It's less developed here, is my impression. So they don't come and they find huge cities. Is that, or am I just wrong? Okay.
No, there was absolutely nothing. I mean, Indian tribes, we know nowadays that in the Amazon, which is far, far away from this area we are talking about, in the Amazon, there must have existed cities. But in this area, until today, we do not know anything about any city. No historian ever wrote anything about a city or a higher civilization, which is not to say that they were not human beings. They were just very happy tribes of Indians who lived from everything the forest gave them. I mean, the fruits in this forest are fantastic. They're nutritious. There's vitamin in them, and hunting was easy. So for anybody, for any culture in this area, there was no need to start agriculture in a meaningful way, like what the Peruvians had. The Peruvians really had a cultivation of potatoes, of quinoa. The Brazilians didn't need to do this, or the Brazilian tribes were free of that.
Interesting. Anything else we want to see in Parachi before we move inland?
No.
So
the impression of this green wall of Atlantic rainforest behind the city of Parachi, you just want to move on and go up.
Well, and then you mentioned the national park above Parachi.
The Serra Bocaina, thank God that's a national park. There's not much to see other than birds.
Okay.
But it is very important that you have this area of Atlantic rainforest protected so development stays away, because you have from there fantastic views down to the sea.
Well, and you say there's not much to see except for birds. Now, some birder in the audience is now yelling at their podcasting device, saying,
no, okay.
what kind of birds are there to see there?
I didn't want to say there's only birds, but what you see is only birds, because you are in a tropical forest, and like in the Amazon, there's too much vegetation for you to see anything else but what's in the air.
Okay.
That's the only reason why I'm mentioning the birds. I mean, there are jaguars, but those cats are shy. You won't see them. And of course, the little monkeys and whatever you imagine belongs to a tropical forest is there.
And are there forest walks or guided tours or other things that we can take when we're in that area? Or how should we best manage the park, especially if we're on our own, if we're not on one of your tours?
You wouldn't go there on your own because you're bitten to death by mosquitoes. Seriously. And you need to know how to defend yourself. And when you go with a guide all of a sudden takes some kind of grass off the ground and tells you, rip this into your face, and the mosquitoes stay away. Quite amazingly. If you don't know this, all this stuff that you can buy in a pharmacy is not helping. I've been there myself on excursion, and I tried my chemical stuff. I was a fool. I should have left this away and just started with the stuff that the guide told me to use. And I was like, nah, come on. But that really helped them.
So the things I get in the pharmacy are really just tenderizers for the mosquitoes, is what you're saying?
I don't know. I don't know. They just didn't react to this repellent the way I wanted them to react. Yeah.
Anything else we should see in the national park before we move further inland?
Not really. There is a little village at the border of it, which is known for its handicraft, but it's not worth stopping there for our guests, because all the handicrafts are pots and pottery, and to track this along your trip is a rather burdensome experience, I guess. Okay.
Are they good pots?
They are famous.
Oh,
they are famous for Brazilians. The Brazilians always talk about the pottery of this area, but I can't really tell. I mean, it's pots for me. It's we all know a lot, but we never know everything. So that is something there I have nothing to say about.
Okay. And then you moved us further inland to, and I wrote it down as Caxambu.
Caxambu. Yes, Caxambu. A little more and more known spa town in the hinterlands there. As I say, this was the spa town of Dom Pedro I, the first emperor of Brazil. He went there and made the place famous and made the waters famous, because there are other spa towns in Brazil, but none became as famous as Caxambu. Caxambu you could compare to these classical spa towns that are in Germany, Baden-Baden, for example, where noble people would spend their summers, and that was Caxambu for Brazil.
Well, and we have to address the elephant in the room. Speaking of Germany, your accent is not Brazilian.
No, it's not. It's absolutely not. And I have been in contact with American culture since 1989 through my husband, and it never really went away.
But you are living in Brazil now?
We are living between Brazil, Germany, and very often we are here in Seattle.
And so when we're in the spa town, are there particular facilities that we're going to? Is there one spa? There are 20 of them?
There's one famous one where fountain is, where the emperor always went to. That's where everybody goes to, and that's the most scenic one. And there can taste a little bit of the water, walk along the park, and then we have lunch and just enjoy the landscape before we go on to Tiradentes. Because Tiradentes is where the colonial heartland of Brazil really starts.
Got it. And so what do we want to do next?
We are going on to, now that is a UNESCO heritage site, Congonhas do Campo. That is really something to see. Congonhas, if you want to spell it, is Congonhas. And that is famous for the prophets that stand in front of a Baroque church. Prophets cast in sandstone by the very famous, by Brazilian standards, artist Aleijadinho, which means a cripple, actually, because he had lost part of his hands to an illness. And still, he did these prophets in front of this church, and they are really amazing when you are there. It's very spiritual side almost, when you stand in front of it and turn around and you have landscape in front of you and below you. That is a highlight of Brazil. When I studied in Brazil in 1986, 87, 88, at that time, when I would look into a travel book about Brazil, Congonhas was always front and center of all travel books to Brazil, and so were other sites in Minas Gerais, in this colonial heartland of Brazil. And I just want to bring this part of Brazil back to public attention because it offers so much for a traveler who is a little bit interested in culture, history, and the landscapes of Brazil and where Brazil actually comes from. Because this is here the area where it all started, where the white Portuguese met the Indians, where the white Portuguese with the Indians had to have slaves to help them in the mines, and how they had to cooperate, not like in a plantation, but these people had to cooperate. A culture grew based on the identity of the white Portuguese, the black slaves, and the Indians. And that is where, when we talked about a Brazilian is never white or never brown or whatever, that you have all kinds of Brazilians. This all started in this area of Brazil, and to the point that until 1808, nobody in this area spoke Portuguese. It was just called a general language which was made up of Portuguese, Indian languages, and African dialects. This mixture was eradicated in 1908. Well, that's another story, of course, but it somehow belongs to this. The Portuguese transferred the capital of the empire from Lisbon to Rio de Janeiro. From that moment on, it was just chic to speak pure Portuguese.
In 1908?
1808.
1808. Okay, that makes more sense. So during the Napoleonic Wars.
Exactly. When the Portuguese crown had to flee Napoleon, and they got to Brazil. Yeah. Going on from Congonhas, there's not much of a hotel. We usually go all the way to Ouro Preto. And Ouro Preto is the hub of the gold and silver mining of the time, was the richest town, and for some time it was also the capital of the state of Minas Gerais. This is the origin of independent movements. The state of Minas Gerais wanted to become independent from the empire. They never succeeded, but they still have in their flag the signs of that time of the movement of independence. Ouro Preto really, when you look at it, looks like a Portuguese town, just richer, a lot richer, a lot more churches. We stayed there just now half a year ago with part of our team. We're staying at a hotel, and I open the door of my room and I look at the church and I say, wait a second, this church is weird. It's not open. It doesn't have any signs of rich people outside, of rich families outside. And this was a church built by slaves with the money of the slaves, because in that area, as I said before, the slaves and the owner of the slave, they had to cooperate. And basically, the slave was paid by the owner until the slave had enough money to buy himself free or herself free.
Okay.
Once these people were free, they were free black people at a time when Brazil was still importing slaves, black people from Africa. But in this area of Minas Gerais, these people were free. And soon would also own slaves because they then basically imitated what their owners did with them in the mines or in the trades around it, because you had to have an infrastructure, technical infrastructure that would help the miners dig the gold out of the ground. And often these people were producing simple tools to dig up gold and simple, small businesses in essence. And they didn't have an army like in the plantations in northeastern Brazil that would control the slaves. So you had to cooperate. And these people afterwards were free, and they had money to build churches, rich inside as well, gold, silver all over the place. One of the many churches in Ouro Preto. And here in Ouro Preto, usually it's good to stay for 2 nights.
Okay.
One day, walk around, discover everything with a guide, and a second day just for you to go alone and just look for objects that you would like on your camera, discover on your own, see how people live, which is something that you cannot do when you go through town with a guide. Now, what we now also do is, when we go on from Ouro Preto to the capital of nowadays state of Minas Gerais, which is Belo Horizonte, we stop now in an open-air museum in Inhotim. I spell that. It's Inhotim.
Okay.
Inhotim. And that is something really unique, and it's probably the best modern art museum in all of South America nowadays. This goes back to the fact that a farmer said, okay, here's my land, I don't want it anymore, basically. Here you can build your museum and you can exhibit your modern art. And it became a park of modern landscaping with modern architecture and modern art. And in this park, there are approximately, I don't know the exact number, maybe the number even changes regularly, but currently I believe it's about 20 smaller museums, all of them different architecture, all of them modern architecture, and some of them built specifically for one piece in the exhibition.
Okay.
That makes it absolutely unique, and you need 2 days to see everything. But most people with an average taste for modern architecture or below average taste for modern architecture, which is rather frequent, I have learned, are done, I'm saying it sounds ugly, are through the museum in a day.
Okay.
But it's really worth seeing that, and it hasn't been on the map of anybody, and it just becomes now famous. And it's always, again, Brazilians have to discover it first. Once the Brazilians have discovered it, then they talk about it. And when they talk about it, then somebody else picks up. And it all starts with people from São Paulo discovering their own country. They come here. They are the ones with the education to understand modern architecture more than people from other parts of the country. And I think it's going to pick up. And soon people will talk a lot more about Inhotim than they're talking about any other part of Brazil, artistically speaking.
It is interesting to note when you talk about people talk about this region at all. When we talk about Brazil, we do, as you mentioned, tend to talk about the coast or the Amazon, as if
I know
those were the only two portions, and that leaves out a lot of Brazil. We've talked about the Pantanal on this show as well, but we haven't talked about that many other places that are not on the coast or in the Amazon.
Well, Chris, it all starts with the very simple fact that Brazil is half the continent.
Yes.
There ought to be more than just the coast and just the Amazon. I mean, the Amazon covers roughly half of Brazil. And the coast is, I don't know, it's like, I've heard the number someplace, but it got to be like 5,000 miles long with everything. Of course, people see the coast and the Amazon, and they see Rio, the marvelous city. They have seen São Paulo, the New York of South America, and the financial capital. But somehow it must have started. And this is here in the colonial heartland of Brazil. There are other places in Brazil like Salvador that also deserve to be mentioned here when you talk about the colonial part of Brazil. But Salvador maintained black versus white, whereas here in this part of Brazil, from the very beginning, white Portuguese, the Indians, and black slaves were mingling. And that makes it so unique because it reflects basically what Brazil is nowadays, a mix of everything.
Well, and my impression is that there's not as much mining these days. That's one of the reasons these towns were preserved, is that the money ran out at some point And so we're talking about what is now the agricultural heartland of Brazil?
The same state is also very important for agriculture.
Okay.
Mainly, it started with coffee.
Ah, okay. Well, you could have led with coffee. There's a lot of people who just perked up literally here. So,
yeah, coffee was very important here in the mountains, but Minas Gerais in this area is very mountainous. When you go farther inland, the state becomes flat.
Okay.
And now has a lot of soybean, coffee, oranges, basically everything what you can imagine. Minas Gerais is a very rich state when it comes to agriculture, but also do not forget that, yes, the gold and the silver is gone or exhausted, those mines, but you have in the area lots of copper.
Okay.
And Minas Gerais, translated, means general mines. And you have some minerals that are very important in the production of good steel, like itaberit minerals that are found only in this area of Brazil. They probably exist someplace else, but here they're easy to find. And that is a very important part of Brazilian economy nowadays. There was once, just for people that have a technical understanding, there was once a narrow gauge rail line that would connect the mines to the coast. This narrow gauge rail line now is a double track and has trains that are up to 3,000 meters long. That is about 2 miles long. These trains go every couple of minutes. It is amazing how much copper there is and has been transported down to the coast. And one of the Brazilian miners, Vale, owns the biggest ships on earth that make the trip from Brazil directly to China. There is still money to be made, but you barely see these mines. They are partially open mines.
Open pit mines.
Open pit mines because they're hiding behind some hill.
Okay.
We don't really see them.
Interesting. Okay. What else are we going to see while we're in this region?
After Inhotim, you are pretty much exhausted. Your senses are exhausted. Then we add on very often the capital of the state, Belo Horizonte, which is relatively new, but it's good for modern architecture, especially for Oscar Niemeyer's architecture.
I'm sorry, that's the name of the architect.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oscar Niemeyer is the architect. He died 104 years old and still designing buildings. If people are not interested in modern architecture, we stop it here. Go back to Rio and just stop on the way back to Rio in the Imperial Palace, at the Imperial Palace of Petrópolis, in the mountains where Dom Pedro I had his summer residence, which he needed because he was convinced that Rio was too hot in summer, and that makes sense. There you get a little insight into the history of the emperor's family, which is quite interesting when you know something about the European aristocracy, when you can see where these people all came from, how they interlined and intertwined with the Europeans, and then we are back to Rio.
Okay. Well, you mentioned the weather. So we're up in the mountains, so it's a little cooler than it is on the coast. What is the weather like, and what's the best time to come?
My favorite time to come is April.
Okay. So fall.
Yes, it's shoulder season. For that reason, there are not that many people there in the very first place. But the best thing about April is a time when historically clear, cooler, very dry air from the Antarctica is moving north, clearing the skies so that for weeks on end you have deep blue skies. And that is just my favorite. You can go year-round. People sometimes talk about rainy season, but that is not really the truth. I mean, what you don't have in Brazil is monsoon, like in India. You have a season when it rains more, and you have a season when it rains less, in water speaking. But when you are in summer, which is technically the rainy season, you have every day you have a thunderstorm that brings down a lot of water. But after the thunderstorm, the sky clears again, and you have blue skies again. So just look at Carnival. Carnival is the main season for travel to Brazil still.
Sure.
And that is smack in the middle of the rainy season. And everybody still goes there and comes back with fantastic impressions.
Okay. Best day of the year to be in this area, a particular festival or something like that you would say that we shouldn't miss?
There is one festival that is linked to Carnival, which is actually the Winners Parade. The Minas Parade always starts on the weekend after Carnival. After Carnival officially is over, the weekend after Mardi Gras. And that weekend in Rio, the best summer schools perform again. They have been nominated before, during Carnival, but after Carnival, they can perform again. And then you should go and see it because it is the performance, it's the colors, it's the music without the big crowds. You don't have that many people in town anymore because usually after Mardi Gras, everybody goes home.
Now, you mentioned that the culture here being different. Are we going to find that in the food as well? Are there different foods in the area, or is that going to be pretty much?
Oh, yeah. Brazilians say the best food of Brazil comes from Minas Gerais.
Okay.
That is based on the simple fact, as I said before, that there's so many fruits from the area, and then there are simple ingredients that they needed to feed the miners because they needed a lot of carbohydrates. So the best food, yes. Is it healthy? I didn't say that. It is just extremely yummy.
So, for example, what should we try that's...
Even if you don't go there, but you're in Brazil, try the cheese from there.
Okay.
Queijo Minas. That is absolutely... Who went to Brazil and tasted Queijo Minas is wondering why we cannot get this in any other place in the world. It is famous, but it comes back to simple facts. As I said before, Minas Gerais is mountains, is hills. So you didn't have many flats for agriculture. What they had, however, were cows.
Sure.
Cows produce milk. But how do you bring the cows to the market? You cannot bring the milk to the market because it's tropical, it's hot, and everything is far away.
Right.
So the best thing you could do was turn the milk into cheese and then bring this to Rio and sell it there. That's how it started. All the ingredients that you have basically are from the forest. Of course, you have potatoes, and then you have little flat areas along the rivers where you could plant rice. That is part of it. Beans is part of it, and other vegetables indigenous to this area.
Excellent. What else do we need to know before we go to this area of Brazil?
You need to know that this is usually an overnight flight that deters people from going there. But on the other hand, it's not going to take you in a completely different time zone.
Right.
You're not going to Asia. You're just going south. Overnight, that's all right. But you arrive tired, but you're over your jet lag of 2 or 3 hours maximum within a day. I mean, you're so overwhelmed. Upon arrival in Rio, you go up to the Sugarloaf and you look around. People forget about the jet lag very fast.
Excellent.
Thank God, yeah.
I'm standing in the prettiest spot in this whole region. Where am I standing and what am I looking at?
The prettiest spot in the whole region. You're talking to a German.
Okay.
The prettiest part is a sidewalk cafe in Tiradentes where you overlook the landscape and have one of the local craft beers.
Okay. Do you have a favorite draft beer you're going to recommend?
Actually not, because all the craft beers in Minas Gerais are pretty similar. I mean, they're not crazy craft beers that taste like strawberries like in the United States.
Okay.
No, there are really improvements to real beer, and that's what I really appreciate there. But the best place just for looking around, for me, as I said before, is the spiritual moment when you are in Congonhas and look down from the prophets. And that is something that I really appreciate, and that's why I like to go back there.
Okay. One thing that makes you laugh and say only in this region.
And the way of talking that when you spend time in this region and you come back and all of a sudden you speak like those people there, and everybody looks at you and says, you must have picked up this energy from Brazil. When you talk to somebody from that region, they have an energy when they are communicating. That is the best thing.
It's not just the coffee, you're saying.
No, it's not.
Excellent. With that, we're going to bring this to a close. Our guest again has been Juergen Keller from southamerica.travel. Juergen, thanks so much for coming on Amateur Traveler and sharing with us your love for Brazil and especially for this colonial heartland.
Thank you so much for being on your show, Chris. And yes, it is southamerica.travel. Thank you for being on your show, Chris.
In news of the community, I heard from Justin on the episode we did recently on San Francisco. I just listened to this one and really enjoyed all of the recommendations for outside of the normal tourist sites. You referred generally to the Richmond district, but I think it's worth specifically calling out Clement Street, with its eclectic blend of restaurants, bars, shops, etc. The reference to Burmese food may have indirectly called it out. Other good walking streets that don't get much buzz are Polk Street, have breakfast at Brenda's, walk north from there, and Union Street through Cow Hollow. Finally, some free spots for great views besides Twin Peaks are Marshall Beach, walk from the Presidio in the late afternoon, Taylor and Vallejo for the Bay Bridge, Hyde and Greenwich for the Golden Gate, and the view of the southwest corner of Dolores Park. So many great things to see, do, eat, and drink in the city. Justin, I so agree with you, and you are so right about Clement Street, and you're right, the Burma Superstar restaurant is on Clement Street, and it's across from a Vietnamese restaurant, and I know there's all sorts of other great food there. And yeah, Union Street is a great shopping place as well, so a lot of people enjoy Union Street for some of the food there, but also some of the shopping. Now, I want to remind people that we're still looking for people to go with us on the Africa trip in May of 2019 to South Africa and Botswana. Signups for that are available, amateurtraveler.com/Africa 2019. And with that, we're going to end this episode of Amateur Traveler. If you have any questions, send an email to host@amateurtraveler.com, or better yet, leave a comment on this episode at amateurtraveler.com. If you want to sponsor it, that's the same email you can use to get a hold of me. And thanks so much for listening.